An enslaved pilot sailed a Confederate military transport straight through the guns guarding Charleston Harbor. He did it before dawn. He did it with families hidden below deck. And if the men at Fort Sumter had realized who was really at the wheel, the escape could have ended in seconds. This is the story of Robert Smalls, the people who made the escape with him, and the Confederate ship called the Planter. Robert Smalls knew the ship and the harbor intimately. He had been born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina, and was sent to Charleston as a boy to be hired out for work. Over the years, he learned the waterfront, docks, tides, channels, signals, and the difficult routes between the forts. By the Civil War, he was serving as Planter's pilot. That did not make him free. It meant the Confederate system was using his skill while denying him any control over his own life. But skill can become an opening. The white officers aboard Planter often went ashore at night, even though they were not supposed to leave the enslaved crew alone on the vessel. In early May, Smalls and other crew members began making a plan. It depended on more than one man being brave. Engineers had to make steam. Deckhands had to work the ship. People on shore had to trust that the boat would return for them. And wives and children would have to climb aboard, knowing that a single mistake could send everyone back into slavery, or get them killed. Smalls's wife, Hannah, was part of that danger. Their children were part of it too. This was not a stunt for a headline. It was a family deciding that staying was more dangerous than trying to escape. On the night of May 12th, the Planter returned to Charleston after a military errand. Its 3 white officers went ashore. The enslaved crew was left aboard. Around 3 in the morning, the crew lit the boilers. The side wheel began to turn. They guided the ship to a meeting point and brought aboard their families and other freedom seekers. 16 people were now betting everything on one slow steamship. Smalls put on the captain's coat and a straw hat like the captain's. The point was not to fool someone standing a few feet away. In the dim, early light, at a distance, the guards needed to see what they expected to see, the Planter moving on ordinary Confederate business. The ship left with Confederate flags still flying. It passed the first defenses and patrols. The crew knew the signals the forts expected. At each checkpoint, they had to perform normality while carrying an escape inside the ship. That is why calling this story "Robert Smalls Stole a Ship" is not enough. He was at the wheel, but the escape depended on a crew whose labor already ran the vessel, on families who chose to board it, and on local knowledge gathered under coercion. Then came the hardest test. Fort Sumter was the last major Confederate checkpoint between the Planter and the open water. In 1862, the fort was not a monument. It was an armed position in an active war, with guns that could smash a small steamer. As Planter approached, the crew needed the sentry to accept the ship's signal. Smalls gave the expected whistle. The fort did not fire. The ship passed. Only after the Planter had moved beyond the range of the last Confederate guns could the crew reveal what it was doing. The Confederate flag came down. A white sheet went up. But safety still was not certain. Out on the water, the Union blockade did not yet know that this was an escape. It saw a Confederate-looking transport coming from Charleston. A Union ship, the Onward, prepared to meet a possible threat. For the people aboard Planter, the meaning of the white sheet had to be understood before the Union guns fired. This is the final twist in the escape. They had passed the Confederacy by looking Confederate, and now they had to convince the Union that they were not the enemy. The signal worked. The Planter came alongside the Union blockade. Smalls, the crew, the women, and the children were free. But the ship carried more than people. It also brought weapons and a vessel that the Confederacy had been using. Just as important, Smalls and the crew knew the harbor. They knew channels, fortifications, military activity, and where defenses had changed. Union commanders gained information they had not had before. That is the larger answer to why this escape mattered. It was not only an act of flight from slavery, although it was that. The people on Planter turned knowledge the Confederate system had extracted from them into an advantage against that system. The Union Navy kept the Planter. Smalls stayed in Union service as its pilot. Later, he was given command of the ship. The man the Confederacy had forced to navigate its defenses was now helping the Union navigate against the Confederacy. That role reversal was powerful, but it did not make the whole war simple. In May 1862, the United States had not yet made general emancipation its official war aim. Freedom seekers who reached Union lines still faced uncertainty, military labor demands, and discrimination. One ship could not solve any of that. But the escape made one fact impossible to ignore. Enslaved people were not simply waiting for presidents, generals, or laws to decide their future. They were choosing routes. They were carrying intelligence. They were bringing families with them. They were using skills built under slavery to weaken the people who profited from it. Episode 1 of this series began with the political collapse after Lincoln's election. Robert Smalls and the Planter show what happened when people held in slavery refused to wait for that fractured country to decide their future. This was becoming a different kind of war, one in which enslaved people were helping decide the outcome. In the next chapter goes even further. In 1863, Harriet Tubman, black soldiers, scouts, boatmen, and freedom seekers would guide Union gunboats up South Carolina's Combahee River, taking the war directly into the plantation system that slavery depended on. The Planter did not escape because one man got lucky. It escaped because a group of people saw that the ship they were forced to run could become their way out, and then made that impossible choice together.